Please remain standing for the reading of the word. Our scripture reading is from the first letter of John, chapter 3, verses 16 to 18. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please be seated.
Amen. Amen. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hope Church. My name is Drew. I'm one of the pastors here, and I actually wanted to start with a little bit of family news that's happening in the life of our church community, and that relates to me and our family. My role here as the lead pastor of our church community, I just wanted to let you all know, and an announcement went out actually on the Slack channel in the East Village, but I didn't have a chance to actually share this in person, and that's basically that our family will be going on a sabbatical this summer. For 2.5 months. Wow, yes, I love it. Thank you. And we shared that news. It's part of our regular rhythms as a pastoral staff, as part of our church community. This has been a practice. If you've been part of our Emotionally Healthy Discipleship courses, you've probably heard us regularly talk about kind of the importance of this rhythm between rest and work, and how God actually invites us to be a people who, instead of working for our rest, being a people who work from our rest. And not only is that true for our kind of the weekly rhythm of a 24-hour Sabbath, but it's also true, especially in this vocation of ministry, about regularly taking times of extended time away so that I and our family might experience a season of rest and renewal. So I wanted to actually thank our elders and our staff team for all the ways that they've blessed us to do this. Now, this is true for the rest of our pastoral staff as well. So Jordan and Emily, the full-time staff that are part of our church community, will also be going on sabbaticals at different times and seasons. And here's one of the things that I recognize, and again, I want to thank our leadership for this. But I realize that for me to go away on sabbatical, there's a part of me. We actually started Hope Church. The original Hope Church started in 2012. And so we've been part of starting new churches and being part of different kind of Christian movements that have been happening throughout the city. And so we have this regular rhythm of going on sabbatical. And when I first went on sabbatical, it was one of the hardest, most excruciating things. Now, I realize some of you might be like, that sounds so counter. Because most of us, when we think of sabbaticals, we think of rest, renewal, and just honestly watching Netflix all day and things like that. But honestly, for me, one of the reasons why it was so difficult, especially in those first couple of weeks, is because it was so difficult. Because I was worried about so many things that were happening. Like, I remember just thinking, like, I've got nothing to do. And for someone who comes from such a workaholic tendency and background that I do, it was like really difficult. I felt incredibly jittery. I was like, oh my goodness, how are people going to know how to turn on the air conditioning? What if we don't have enough snacks in the back there? What if there's not enough water bottles that kind of are around? Like, all these little kind of nagging questions kept plaguing me, and I realized so much of my life, and especially in my vocation as a pastor, so much of it can get tied up with my identity, like as a pastor and with the church, and how the church does in a very kind of exterior performative way ends up becoming a reflection of my own kind of sense of self. And I realized that there's a part of me that gets so tied up in how the church does in a very worldly sense that can often get tied up in my own ego. And I realized, this is just a little clue into my own personal life. Like, sometimes, if the church is not going well, I can feel like a failure. And sometimes if the church is doing really well, I can feel like God loves me more. And both of those things are untrue. And I realized the discipline of going on sabbatical is for me not only to find rest and replenishment, but honestly to extricate myself from my ego from performance and how the church is doing and have that all tied in. And so I realize it's really healthy for me to go away and for me to walk into, it's almost like what I say is it's a practice of dying, which Jesus calls us to do. Welcome to church, everyone. If you're new here, so glad. But the practice of dying to all those things that my ego gets so tied up in, so that hopefully I can find a life that's not defined by performance and things like that, but instead find it in God and in God alone. Meanwhile, our staff is all pretty thrilled that I'm going on sabbatical. They're like, we need a sabbatical from you, Drew. So anyhow, so I just want to say thank you. I just want to let you guys know and to hear it from me in person. The sabbatical will actually start in mid-June. So on the 13th, we're having a worship and prayer night here. That'll be my last kind of time with our church community. And then I'll be gone for 2.5 months from our church community. Now, some of you may or may not know, I actually have a role with an organization called Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. I'll actually be stepping in as a president of that organization in October, in addition to my role as a pastor at Hope Church. And so during the summer, I will be doing some things with some of our partner churches with Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, but they won't be with Hope. But it's those things are very life-giving for me to actually spend time with all these friends who are part of this movement of hopefully bringing together a group that's galvanized around this common kind of care and concern around emotionally healthy discipleship, a discipleship that goes beneath the surface. So just wanted to let you all know, and I'll be checking in with our staff team. Dave Jennings will actually be leading our staff team as a whole. Jordan and Emily, of course, they'll continue to lead this community along with the rest of our executive team. Again, if you'd like, you can check out the Slack channel. It has more of all the details about what we'll be up to and all sorts of things like that. Now, really, if you are new here and you're like, this announcement seems so relevant to us, sorry. But glad you're here. Come back next week because you could hear from Jordan, who's the regular preacher here at this location. And he's a wonderful, wonderful pastor and preacher. And so So let's get into today's text, because we've actually been in this message series called Life on the Other Side. And when we talk about life on the other side, what are we talking about? Well, on Easter Sunday, we actually celebrated this kind of historical event that the whole Christian movement is centered around. And that's the bodily resurrection of Jesus. That this really happened, that Jesus was a person, flesh and blood, who we believed is fully God and fully human, who actually rose again from the dead. And so on Easter Sunday, we actually celebrate the reality of this bodily resurrection that really happened. And the reason why we're all here is because somehow we believe that somehow Jesus did really resurrect from the grave. And one of the things that we've been exploring, especially in these letters to the early church that we're going around, is we've been exploring these different themes of what happens in light of the resurrection. What is life like on the other side? Now, here's some of the themes that we've been exploring. We've been exploring how now the people of God, they move from a life of despair to actually a life of hope. Because the founder just rose again from the dead, y'all. Like, can you believe this? And because of that, we do have this living hope in a God who actually raises the dead, and that changes everything. Life on the other side, it moves from scarcity, from this idea that, oh no, what am I going to do? I don't have enough. How am I going to handle this raise in my rent? How am I going to handle one of the kind of these financial struggles that I'm going through? But actually moving from a place of scarcity to actually generosity. Moving from a place of isolation, of especially in a city like this, which is so dense and yet so lonely, that what does it look like for us to be people who are isolated, but actually to join this new family as a community of people, and going from anxiety to peace, which Jordan preached on last week. This idea that, again, anxious people, we can tend to actually be divided in the way that we think about things, but actually have a peace that transcends all understanding. Now, I recognize some of this, even as I talk about some of these different moves of what life is like on the other side. I mean, I know for one, I still struggle with anxiety. I know I still struggle with scarcity. I know I struggle with despair. The Knicks are down 2-0, everyone, right now. Like, I've been praying. And all of those things, anxiety, scarcity, despair, isolation. And today we're talking about this idea of moving from self-seeking to actually being self-giving. Now, in all of these different ways, I look at these things, and now we're not saying that, hey, now because we're Christians, we don't struggle with any of these things like anxiety, being self-seeking, or anything like that. Instead, we're talking about after Jesus resurrects from the grave, in the earliest Christians, you see this vision of what life could be like. And in this vision, they basically talk about these different movements, that in light of the resurrection, what if we could actually be a people who embraced the life with Jesus in such a profound way that it changed everything? Now, a part of me, even as I read this list, there's a part of me that's like, oh my goodness, these Christians, they think they're better than everyone, that they've got peace when the rest of the world is anxious. They're generous when the rest of the world is scarce, or struggles with scarcity. Oh my goodness, they think they have this unique community when the rest of the world, like, there's a part of me that actually, I look at this list and I'm like, these people must be the most uppity people that think they've got everything figured out. Well, you know what's interesting? Again, you got to imagine, like the early Christian movement, it was not founded from a place of power with people that had all sorts of social capital. It wasn't from the academy. It wasn't from the upper echelons of government or money or wealth or fame. In fact, these were people that were incredibly poor. They were a persecuted minority, and they were talking about a Jewish Messiah in the midst of this Roman Empire, which rules that known world during that time in that region. So, I mean, here's some statistics just to give you a sense of the numbers in Rome, in the Roman Empire. So if you can imagine, historians such as Rodney Stark from Baylor University, he estimates that 7,500 Christians in the first century. So from the time that Jesus resurrects from the grave, all the way up until the time of 100 AD, could you imagine there's 7,500 Christians in that region during that time? Now, just to give you a sense of that, 7,500, that's the number of people that were outside of MSG after the Knicks beat the Celtics, all right? Like, now, in light of the fact that the Roman Empire probably had about 50 to 70 million people. So do you see how small of a minority this group of Christians are? So these letters that are being passed around, it's not like these letters with this incredible vision for what life is like, and even this moral vision of what life is like when people are listening, it's not like these people are like, oh yeah, those people they're just those rich people who are in power, who are trying to tell the rest of us how to live. It's like, no, these people are in prison, they're persecuted, they're from the underside, and somehow there are people who are in poverty, who are an oppressed minority, who are now talking about a peace that transcends understanding. They're talking about generosity when the rest of the world tends to be so frugal in the way that they think about life. And so you got to get yourself in a position where it's almost like, no, do you see? Like this moral vision, not even a moral vision, but a vision for life. Like it comes from a people who are on the underside of society. They're struggling with money, with poverty, with persecution, with difficulty. And somehow they embrace this faith that allows them to take even their lowly situation and have a vision for life that's incredibly different. So for instance, I mean, check out this letter, right? The letter that was just written and that was read for us, that Josh read, in 1 John chapter 3, verse 16 to 18. Look at what John writes as one of the early followers of Jesus. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. What? He's talking about a sacrificial kind of love that we are to have. Now, most of us, when we think about it, we're like, oh, no, yeah. You know who should be sacrificial? It should be the top 1%. It should be those wealthy people. Those people in Midtown. No, I'm just kidding. Not the East Village. I mean, this is what we think, right? But like, do you see this vision? How stunning it is that it's coming from John, who's writing to a persecuted minority as well. Because again, the early Christian movement was like this. And look what he says. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, the word for pity is this word for being moved, like in the gut, having pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. What a vision for life. Now, before we recoil and say like, oh, these privileged people are trying to tell the rest of us how to live, like, again, these people were not privileged. In fact, they came from a place of extreme need and poverty. But yet they have this incredible moral vision that if you think about it, whether you're a Christian or you're not, even as you hear these words, I mean, there's a part of me that's kind of like, that is an incredible vision. Could you imagine even just how relevant it is today with how strident and polarized the world is today and our city is today? Could you imagine having and living into this ideal? And yet this ideal of living for the good of others is actually what John is writing about. Now, in 1985, there was a seminal book that was written that from a sociologist from Berkeley named Robert Bellah and a number of others, and it's a book called Habits of the Heart. And Habits of the Heart actually talk about individualism and commitment in American life. And one of the things that Robert Bellah explores is basically the history of the United States, the Constitution of the United States. In the Constitution of the United States, the history of this whole movement that now today we know kind of as the United States of America, how it's been so marked by this movement towards individualism. And he talks about two different kinds of individualism. One kind of individualism is this expressive individualism. Expressive individualism is the individualism that basically focuses on me and personal fulfillment. And then he talks about a utilitarian individualism. And utilitarian individualism is this self-reliance that I tend to have, that I look out for myself when it comes to the way that I go about in the world around me. That each one of us, we tend to look out for ourselves. And one of the things that Bellah actually observes, and this is back in 1985, this book has been through several different revisions, and many sociologists have remarked about how seminal a work this is, because it encapsulates so much of what you and I, when the way that the waters that we swim in when it comes to living in the United States has to do with individualism. And here's what Bellah writes. Bellah writes, the language of individualism dominates American moral and social thought so completely that it may be hard to imagine alternatives. One of the things that Bellah talks about is how our culture is so awash in individualism that because we have this individualistic way, both expressive individualism and utilitarian individualism, and yet at the same time we also say that we value community. But the reality is, and he explores this tension between how can we be a people who actually, we value individualism, and yet when it comes to like community, we all want it, but when people want us to RSVP for their events, we always leave it unresponded to. Or maybe, just click on maybe. That's not true. No one clicks on maybe. People just don't respond. I mean, isn't this true though, right? Like there's this tension that each of us live with between individualism versus communal life. Now, notice, in light of that, okay, if the world that we live in, and especially American society, is so awash, we don't even know it. It's all about individualism. Even within the church, the questions that we ask, and listen, as a pastor of a church, I would probably have the same questions, right? When it comes to a church, what does this church have to do? How can it serve me? How can this church, is the preaching okay? Is the music okay? Are the snacks, is the coffee, how's the coffee? Or like many of the questions that I ask has a lot to do with my own personal fulfillment, my own personal needs. Even the way that I evaluate church communities. Now, think about that kind of approach, this individualistic approach, to how different it is. Look at this vision. It says, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. And he speaks with such a moral vision. He says, John writes, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. What? Having the kind of approach where I actually come not with an approach that's self-seeking, but so different. If anyone has material possessions, that when it comes down to your hard-earned cash, and you see a brother or sister in need, but you have no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with just words or speech. And again, there's this movement, especially that comes from our politicians. Whenever there's another school shooting, there's always kind of the tweet, our thoughts and prayers are with them. And look, John is actually, just think about how prophetic these words are, even to today's world. He basically says, not just with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. Putting your money where your mouth is, actually doing something about it. And so here's basically what John is presenting. For these Christians who are persecuted, in poverty, on the underside of society, it's this. It's that a flourishing life is actually not self-seeking. A flourishing life is self-giving. It has an orientation that's fundamentally different than the ways of the world. Now, I mean, just think about that even in American society. This individualistic kind of propensity that each one of us have to protect myself, to protect my own family. But when it comes to thinking about others, and yet there's this moral vision that's given that, what, you ought to lay down your life for someone? I'm like, hold on. What's in it for me? I mean, that's my initial question that usually comes. Now, a book that was written recently is this book called Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembke. And it's a fascinating book because Anna Lembke, who actually works out at Stanford University, studies addictions as well as kind of psychotherapy. And here's what Dr. Lembke, sorry, not Anna, we're not on a first name basis. I don't know her, I've never met her. But you can see the tagline, finding balance in the age of indulgence. Now, one of the things that's outlined in this book, Dopamine Nation, is dopamine is actually a neurotransmitter that usually kind of helps regulate, especially when I feel pleasure. And one of the things that Dr. Lembke actually writes about is how our culture is so self-seeking in the ways that we look for pleasure in hedonism. We look for pleasure in all sorts of things. Even technological advancements, we look for things that will be more pleasing and easier for us. So things that are pleasing for us, things that kind of give us these short-term hits of joy and pleasure. So, and what happens is dopamine kicks in. However, there's something within our physiology that whenever pleasure happens, a dopamine deficit occurs when all I'm doing is I'm seeking pleasure constantly. Because, again, that's what I do. And the way that technology runs, social media runs, so much of it is about getting that hit, right? Anything to have us feel better about ourselves. And so because we have this approach to life that tends to be so self-seeking, so pleasure-seeking, whenever I get that dopamine hit, but here's what happens within our physiology. What happens is when that dopamine deficit happens, it needs to regulate out between pleasure and pain. And so what ends up happening is if I find myself in this addictive pattern of constantly looking for that hit, right? The first time that I had that drink, oh, it felt good. I got that little buzz. The second time, I don't get the buzz, but I kind of remember that feeling of getting that buzz, so I want to take that second drink, then that third, then that fourth time, then that fifth time, and all of a sudden an addiction occurs. Why? Because I'm looking for pleasure, personal pleasure. And this personal pleasure that I keep looking for pleasure in, what ends up happening is I keep seeking that kind of pleasure. Then all of a sudden, this dopamine deficit occurs, and all of a sudden, I also start to feel intense pain, anxiety, depression. And one of the things that she outlines is that here we are in this pleasure-seeking community, but physiologically, it needs to be balanced out by pain, by this regulatory kind of way in which otherwise I keep falling into an addiction or I'm constantly looking for that hit. Now, here's what happens though. In the culture that we live in, we end up getting so anxious and mental health issues are at an all-time high. Research has shown that self-harm and depression are at an all-time high. And she outlines that these things actually go hand in hand with this individualistic kind of need for getting that dopamine hit. But when that deficit occurs, man, we crash and burn like crazy because at the same time, we have this addictive tendency, and social media is the greatest kind of indicator of this. We can scroll like crazy, but you and I know the more we're on social media, the more anxious I might feel. The more I start to compare myself about where other people are going on vacation, about what the other food that they're eating. Gosh, it's so annoying, right? Like there's all these ways. And she talks about this idea of what does it look like for us to actually live a life of balance that's more regulated. Now, here's what's interesting about what Lembke writes. Here's what Lembke writes. The antidote to addiction is not sobriety. It's not just giving up some of those things, although she does talk about fasting and taking these 30-minute purges from this dopamine hit. But it's actually connection. Now, connection through what? Here's what she talks about in terms of what connection might look like. Connection through honesty, humility. In other words, sharing honestly and humbly about what we're going through. But it's also through serving others. Now, I remember seeing that being like, serving others? What? When I'm depressed, when I'm anxious, the last thing I want to do is serve others. In fact, a part of me, I basically just want to retreat into my room, just get some popcorn and maybe some chocolate or both, and just drown myself in Korean dramas, and just watch these things. Because the last thing I want to do is serve others. I don't want to be a downer on other people. I'm just not in any mood to be around other people. And yet, you know what's so interesting? She talks about how actually the way that we begin to heal from this addictive, self-seeking way is actually to start serving others. Isn't that fascinating? There's this vision for serving others. Now, look again at this verse. Look at what John writes. When John is writing about this vision for the Christian life, he says, if you have material possessions and you're not moved for those in need, he talks, first of all, that your heart changes. Your heart changes so that your gut, like there's pity. You experience this compassion and this pity for those in need. But notice, it's more than simply just changing your heart and your disposition. It's actually, it actually manifests through words and actions, in doing things for other people, in serving other people. John is giving this vision that goes so contrary to the ways of life and ways of the world that you and I often, we've been so awash in, which is this self-seeking, self-promoting manner of living. He wants you to be moved to the heart, but also to do it with actions and with truth. Now, what might actions look like? Here's a list that I came up with. Serving others through words, just through saying kind words to each other. Serving people through just being nice, especially in a city like ours. Serving others with time and energy, as Alexa was giving this announcement of this heart. And one of the things I so appreciate about this community is the heart to serve our neighbors and to actually spend time and energy thinking about how we can bring resources to bear for those in need. For those of you who volunteer, whether with Connection or production or with our kids and teenagers or worship or prayer or groups and building community and facilitating community, the ways that we serve one another. And again, a part of me, when it comes down to like, oh, well, I'm not in any place because I've just been feeling really down or anxious. Well, what if the invitation was to actually take a step and get connected through serving? Not only that, but with our money. Being a people who are generous. Giving of our money. Now, I realize, like, even mentioning that, like, in a city like ours, again, a part of me is just kind of like, oh, do you know how expensive it is here, Drew? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And yet, what would it look like for us as people to actually have a moral vision of generosity, of being generous even with our finances? Now, I'll tell you what, even as I talk about these things, hey, what if we were to serve others with our words, our time and energy, and with our money? Like, as I say those things, I mean, there's a part of me that's kind of like, I don't know. I've got enough problems. I've got enough issues on my own. And, you know, honestly, there's a phrase that keeps coming to me whenever I think about, like, giving more of myself. And here's the phrase. It's survival of the fittest. Natural selection, baby. I mean, this is why we come to the city. It's because we want this competition. We want all the smoke with this competition. And it's about survival of the fittest. Now, some of us, of course, this phrase comes from this idea of natural selection and microevolution and so on and so forth. But this idea that, yeah, like, this is a dog-eat-dog world. And this city is honestly, no one's looking out for anyone else. I've got to look out for myself. I mean, that's the phrase that comes to mind whenever I think about this disposition. And it makes sense. And what social scientists and what scientists have said about a moral vision for how we end up, especially in our primal nature as human beings, behave, it really is survival of the fittest. Look out for yourself. This is the way that the world works. Now, do you see how counter this is then? Gosh, even me as a pastor who's preaching this message, I'm like so self-seeking. I'm trying to look out for me and my own family. Like, this vision is stunning. Where does it come from? Dave Jennings, who's our church administrator, this past week he was telling me about how he actually is the founder of a health clinic that's one of the largest health clinics, Christian health clinics in the city, in Queens. It's a ministry that we support once a month. A group of folks from our church, from our locations, actually go out there. And he was telling me about how there's this young person in his 40s, who's my age, actually in his mid-40s, has been in and out of prison, and trying to get his life back together, has come to the health clinic for some health issues as someone who's uninsured, and lives in one of the nearby housing developments. And he was just sharing with me about how he's been spending regular time with this guy. And as he's sharing with me, here's the thought that comes to my mind. I'm like, Dave, why are you spending so much time with him? Like, you've got a lot of responsibilities. Like, you're kind of an important guy. Like, why are you spending time with him? Now, I didn't say those words out loud. But as I was thinking about this passage, I was just thinking about, like, oh my gosh, like the state of my heart. Here I am preaching on this. And here's this man who's trying to live out this call. Now, this doesn't mean that we do this with everyone. And we all have our own limits. But I just remember my own heart, like, how self-seeking it can be. Part of me is like, Dave, why don't, instead of spending time with this person, you need to spend more time helping the church. Like, again, there's all these ways in which my mental calculus, my heart disposition tends to be so counter to even the words on this page. And you know what's crazy? Is this theme, though, for a persecuted minority, was actually a theme that comes up throughout the teachings of Jesus and the early Christians. Look at what it says in Philippians 2. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own self-interests, but each of you to the interests of others. What? Listen, for those of you who are married, it's hard enough to do this for our spouse, isn't it? Sorry, I shouldn't presume that for anyone. I'm saying that for myself. Like, it's hard enough for me to do that with my wife and my children. Like, to do that with even others? But notice, see, the foundation of the Christian story, and this is why it's so compelling and so counter to the world. The reason it's so compelling, look at what John writes. At the beginning of this passage, he says, this is how we know what love is. Do you want to know what true love is? Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. He died for you and me. The center of our faith is not a philosophy, a moral vision alone. It's a person. The person of God, Jesus Christ, who dies for us. And the invitation is, and one of the things that I love is, in John 15, it's a passage about remaining connected to the vine, and apart from God, you can do nothing. And in that passage, it talks about how the only way that we have life to give to others is when we are connected to the vine. Is when we ourselves are remaining in this love relationship with God. Is when we have pondered the love of God, seen his self-giving love for us. It's the only way we have anything fulfilling to give. At different times in my life, when I have been on the verge of burnout or other things, it's because I haven't been connected to the vine. I haven't been living rooted in the love of Jesus. And one of the things I love about John and the early Christians is they knew that this vision for life, that the starting place was to be tethered to the one who loves you and died for you and gave his life. And the one who invites us into a vision to be a people who actually just don't look out for ourselves, but to look for the good of others.